We are still living under the reign of logic, but the logical processes of our time apply only to the solution of problems of secondary interest. The absolute rationalism which remains in fashion allows for the consideration of only those facts narrowly relevant to our experience. Logical conclusions, on the other hand, escape us. Needless to say, boundaries have been assigned even to experience. It revolves in a cage from which release is becoming increasingly difficult. It too depends upon immediate utility and is guided by common sense. In the guise of civilization, under the pretext of progress, we have succeeded in dismissing from our minds anything that, rightly or wrongly, could be regarded as superstition or myth, and we have prescribed every way of seeking the truth which does not conform to convention. It would appear that it is by sheer chance that an aspect of intellectual life, and by far the most important in my opinion, about which no one was supposed to be concerned any longer, has recently been brought back to light. Credit for this must go to Freud. On the evidence of his discoveries, a current of opinion is at last developing which will enable the explorer of the human mind to extend his investigations, since he will be empowered to deal with more than merely summary realities. Perhaps the imagination is on the verge of recovering its rights. If the depths of our minds conceal strange forces capable of augmenting or conquering those on the surface, it is in our greatest interest to capture them. First to capture them, and later to submit them, should the occasion arise, to the control of reason. The analysts themselves can only gain by this, but it is important to note that there is no method fixed a priori for the execution of this enterprise, that until the new order it can be considered the province of poets as well as scholars, and that its success does not depend upon the more or less capricious routes which will be followed. It was only fitting that Freud should appear with his critique on the dream. In fact, it is incredible that this important part of psychic activity has still attracted so little attention, for at least from man's birth to his death, thought presents no solution of continuity. The sum of dreaming moments, even taking into consideration pure dream alone, that of sleep, is from the point of view of time no less than the sum of moments of reality, which we shall confine to waking moments. I have always been astounded by the extreme disproportion in the importance and seriousness assigned to events of the waking moments, and to those of sleep by the ordinary observer. Man, when he ceases to sleep, is above all at the mercy of his memory, and the memory normally delights in feebly retracing the circumstances of the dream for him, depriving it of all actual consequence, and obliterating the only determinant from the point at which he thinks he abandoned this constant hope, this anxiety, a few hours earlier. He has the illusion of continuing something worthwhile. The dream finds itself relegated to a parenthesis, like the night, and in general it gives no more counsel than the night. This singular state of affairs seems to invite a few reflections. 1. Within the limits to which its performance is restricted, or what passes for performance, the dream, according to all outward appearances, is continuous and bears traces of organization. Only memory claims the right to edit it, to suppress transitions and present us with a series of dreams rather than the dream. Similarly, at no given instant do we have more than a distinct representation of realities whose coordination is a matter of will. It is important to note that nothing leads to a greater dissipation of the constituent elements of the dream. I regret discussing this according to a formula which in principle excludes the dream. For how long sleeping logicians, philosophers? I would like to sleep in order to enable myself to surrender to sleepers, as I surrender to those who read me with their eyes open, in order to stop the conscious rhythm of my thought from prevailing over this material. Perhaps my dream of last night was a continuation of the preceding nights, and will be continued tonight with an admirable precision. It could be, as they say, and as it is in no way proven that in such a case the reality with which I am concerned even exists in the dream state, or that it does not sink into the immemorial, then why should I not concede to the dream what I sometimes refuse to reality, that weight of self-assurance which by its own terms is not exposed to my denial? Why should I not expect more of the dream sign than I do of a daily increasing degree of consciousness? Could not the dreams as well be applied to the solution of life's fundamental problems? Are these problems the same in one case as in the other, and do they already exist in the dream? Is the dream less oppressed by sanctions than the rest? I am growing old, and perhaps more than this reality to which I believe myself confined, it is the dream and the detachment that I owe to it which is aging me. 2. I return to the waking state. I am obliged to retain it as a phenomenon of interference. Not only does the mind show a strange tendency to disorientation under these conditions, This is the clue to slips of the tongue and lapses of all kinds whose secret is just beginning to be surrendered to us. But when functioning normally, the mind still seems to obey none other than those suggestions which rise from that deep night I am commending. Sound as it may be, its equilibrium is relative. The mind hardly dares express itself, and when it does, it is limited to stating that this idea or that woman has an effect on it. What effect it cannot say. Thus it gives the measure of its subjectivism and nothing more. The idea, the woman, disturbs it, disposes it to less severity. Their role is to isolate 1 second of its disappearance and remove it to the sky in that glorious acceleration that it can be, that it is. Then, as a last resort, the mind invokes chance, a more obscure divinity than the others, to whom it attributes all its aberrations. Who says that the angle from which that idea is presented, which affects the mind, as well as what the mind loves in that woman's eye, is not precisely the same thing that attracts the mind to its dream and reunites it with Dada lost through its own error? And if things were otherwise, of what might the mind not be capable? I should like to present it with the key to that passage. 3. The mind of the dreaming man is fully satisfied with whatever happens to it. The agonizing question of possibility does not arise. Kill, plunder more quickly, love as much as you wish, and if you die, are you not sure of being roused from the dead? Let yourself be led. Events will not tolerate deferment. You have no name. Everything is inestimably easy. What power, I wonder, what power so much more generous than others confers this natural aspect upon the dream and makes me welcome unreservedly a throng of episodes whose strangeness would overwhelm me if they were happening as I write this. And yet I can believe it with my own eyes, my own ears. That great day has come. The beast has spoken. If man's awakening is harsher, if he breaks the spell too well, it is because he has been led to form a poor idea of expiation. 4. When the time comes, when we can submit the dream to a methodical examination, when by methods yet to be determined we succeed in realizing the dream in its entirety, and that implies a memory discipline measurable in generations, but we can still begin by recording salient facts. When the dream's curve is developed with an unequaled breadth and regularity, then we can hope that mysteries which are not really mysterious will give way to the great mystery. I believe in the future resolution of these two states, outwardly so contradictory, which are dream and reality, into a sort of absolute reality, a surreality, so to speak. I am aiming for its conquest, certain that I myself shall not attain it, but too indifferent to my death not to calculate the joys of such possession. They say that not long ago, just before he went to sleep, Saint Paul placed a placard on the door of his manor at Camaret which read, "The poet works." There is still a great deal to say, but I did want to touch lightly in passing upon a subject which in itself would require a very long exposition with a different precision. I shall return to it. For the time being, my intention has been to see that justice was done to that hatred of the marvelous which rages in certain men, that ridicule under which they would like to crush it. Let us resolve, therefore. The marvelous is always beautiful. Everything marvelous is beautiful. Nothing but the marvelous is beautiful. One night, before falling asleep, I became aware of a most bizarre sentence, clearly articulated to the point where it was impossible to change a word of it, but still separate from the sound of my voice. It came to me, bearing no trace of the events with which I was involved at that time. At least to my conscious knowledge, it seemed to me a highly insistent sentence, a sentence I might say, which knocked at the window. I quickly took note of it, and was prepared to disregard it when something about its whole character held me back. The sentence truly astounded me. Unfortunately, I still cannot remember the exact words to this day, but it was something like, "A man is cut in half by the window." A man is cut in half by the window. But it can only suffer from ambiguity, accompanied as it was by the feeble visual representation of a walking man cut in half by a window perpendicular to the axis of his body. It was probably a simple matter of a man leaning on the window and then straightening up, but the window followed the movements of the man, and I realized that I was dealing with a very rare type of image. Immediately I had the idea of incorporating it into my poetic material, but no sooner had I invested it with poetic form than it went out to give way to a scarcely intermittent succession of sentences which surprised me no less than the first, and gave me the impression of such a free gift that the control which I had had over myself up to that point seemed illusory, and I no longer thought of anything but how to put an end to the interminable quarrel which was taking place within me. Totally involved as I was at the time with Freud, and familiar with his methods of examination which I had had some occasion to practice on the sick during the war, I resolved to obtain from myself what one seeks to obtain from a patient, a spoken monologue uttered as rapidly as possible, over which the critical faculty of the subject has no control, unencumbered by any reticence, which a spoken thought as far as such a thing as possible. It seemed to me, and still does, the manner in which the sentence about the man cut in two came to me proves it, that the speed of thought is no greater than that of words, and that it does not necessarily defy language or the moving pen. It was with this in mind that Philippe Soupault, with whom I had shared these first conclusions, and I undertook to cover some paper with writing, with a laudable contempt for what might result in terms of literature. The ease of realization did the rest. At the end of the first day, we were able to read to each other around 50 pages obtained by this method and begin to compare our results. Altogether, those of Soupault and my own presented a remarkable similarity, even including the same faults in construction. In both cases, there was the illusion of an extraordinary verve, a great deal of emotion, a considerable assortment of images of quality such as we would never have been capable of achieving in ordinary writing, a very vivid graphic quality, and here and there an acutely comic passage. The only difference between our texts seemed to me essentially due to our respective natures. Soupault's is less static than mine, and if I may hazard a slight criticism, due to the fact that he had made the mistake of distributing a few words in the way of titles at the head of certain pages, no doubt in the spirit of mystification. On the other hand, I must give him credit for maintaining his steadfast opposition to the slightest alteration in the course of any passage which seemed to me rather badly put. He was completely right on this point, of course. In fact, it is very difficult to appreciate the full value of the various elements when confronted by them. It can even be said to be impossible to appreciate them at the first reading. These elements are outwardly as strange to you who have written them as to anyone else, and you are naturally distrustful of them. Poetically speaking, they are especially endowed with a very high degree of immediate absurdity. The peculiarity of this absurdity, on closer examination, comes from their capitulation to everything, both inadmissible and legitimate, in the world, to produce a revelation of a certain number of premises and facts generally no less objective than any others. In homage to Guillaume Apollinaire, who died recently, and who appears to have consistently obeyed a similar impulse to ours without ever really sacrificing mediocre literary means, Soupault and I used the name Surrealism to designate the new mode of pure expression which we had at our disposal and with which we were anxious to benefit our friends. Today I do not believe anything more need be said about this word. The meaning which we have given it has generally prevailed over Apollinaire's meaning. With even more justification, we could have used supernaturalism, employed by Gérard de Nerval in the dedication of Filet de Feu. In fact, Nerval appears to have possessed to an admirable extent the spirit to which we refer. Apollinaire, on the other hand, possessed only the letter of surrealism, which was still imperfect, and showed himself powerless to give it the theoretical insight that engages us. Here are two passages by Nerval which appear most significant in this regard. I will explain to you, my dear Dumas, the phenomenon of which you speak above. As you know, there are certain storytellers who cannot invent without identifying themselves with the characters from their imagination. You know with what conviction our old friend Nodier told how he had had the misfortune to be guillotined at the time of the Revolution. One became so convinced that one wondered how he had managed to stick his head back on. And since you have had the imprudence to cite one of the sonnets composed in this state of supernaturalist reverie, as the Germans would say, you must hear all of them. You will find them at the end of the volume. They are hardly more obscure than Hegel's Metaphysics or Swedenborg's Memorables, and would lose their charm and explication, if such a thing were possible. So concede me at least the merit of the expression. It would be dishonest to dispute our right to employ the word surrealism in the very particular sense in which we intend it, For it is clear that before we came along, this word amounted to nothing. Thus I shall define it once and for all. Surrealism, noun, masculine, pure psychic automatism by which it is intended to express, either verbally or in writing, the true function of thought. Thought dictated in the absence of all control, exerted by reason, and outside all aesthetic or moral preoccupations. Encyclopedia, philosophy. Surrealism is based on the belief in the superior reality of certain forms of association, heretofore neglected, in the omnipotence of the dream, and in the disinterested play of thought. It leads to the permanent destruction of all other psychic mechanisms, and to its substitution for them in the solution of the principal problems of life.
The Art of Noises by Luigi Russolo. Dear Balilla Pratella, great futurist composer, in Rome, in the Constanzi Theatre, packed to capacity while I was listening to the orchestra performance of your overwhelming futurist music, with my futurist friends Marinetti, Boccioni, Cara, Balla, Soffici, Papini, and Cavacciolo, a new art came into my mind which only you can create. The art of noises, the logical consequence of your marvelous innovations. Ancient life was all silence. In the 19th century, with the invention of the machine, noise was born. Today, noise triumphs and reigns supreme over the sensibility of men. For many centuries, life went by in silence, or at most in muted tones. The strongest noises which interrupted this silence were not intense or prolonged or varied. If we overlook such exceptional movements as earthquakes, hurricanes, storms, avalanches, and waterfalls, nature is silent. Amidst this dearth of noises, the first sounds that man drew from a pierced reed or stretched string were regarded with amazement as new and marvelous things. Primitive races attributed sound to the gods. It was considered sacred and reserved for priests, who used it to enrich the mystery of their rites. And so was born the concept of sound as a thing in itself, distinct and independent of life, and the result was music, a fantastic world superimposed on the real one, an inviolable and sacred world. It is easy to understand how such a concept of music resulted inevitably in the hindering of its progress by comparison with the other arts. The Greeks themselves, with their musical theories calculated mathematically by Pythagoras, and according to which only a few consonant intervals could be used, limited the field of music considerably, rendering harmony, of which they were unaware, impossible. The Middle Ages, with the development and modification of the Greek tetrachordal system, with the Gregorian chant and popular songs, enriched the art of music, but continued to consider sound and its development in time a restricted notion, but one which lasted many centuries, and which still can be found in the Flemish contrapuntalists' most complicated polyphonies. The chord did not exist. The development of the various parts was not subordinated to the chord that these parts put together could produce. The conception of the parts was horizontal, not vertical. The desire, search, and taste for a simultaneous union of different sounds, that is, for the chord, complex sound, were gradually made manifest, passing from the consonant perfect chord with a few passing dissonances to the complicated and persistent dissonances that characterize contemporary music. At first, the art of music sought purity, limpidity, and sweetness of sound. Then different sounds were amalgamated, care being taken, however, to caress the ear with the gentle harmonies. Today, music, as it becomes continually more complicated, strives to amalgamate the most dissonant, strange, and harsh sounds. In this way, we come ever closer to noise sound. This musical evolution is paralleled by the multiplication of machines, which collaborate with man on every front, not only in the roaring atmosphere of major cities, but in the country too, which until yesterday was totally silent. The machine today has created such a variety and rivalry of noises that pure sound, in its exiguity and monotony, no longer arouses any feeling. To excite and exalt our sensibilities, music developed towards the most complex polyphony and the maximum variety, seeking the most complicated successions of dissonant chords and vaguely preparing the creation of musical noise. This evolution towards noise sound was not possible before now. The ear of an 18th century man could never have endured the discordant intensity of certain chords produced by our orchestras, whose members have trebled in number since then. To our ears, on the other hand, they sound pleasant, since our hearing has already been educated by modern life, so teeming with variegated noises. But our ears are not satisfied merely with this, and demand an abundance of acoustic emotions. On the other hand, musical sound is too limited in its qualitative variety of tones. The most complex orchestras boil down to 4 or 5 types of instrument, varying in timbre. Instruments played by bow or plucking, by blowing into metal or wood, and by percussion. And so modern music goes round in this small circle, struggling in vain to create new ranges of tones. The limited circle of pure sounds must be broken, and the infinite variety of noise sound conquered. Besides, everyone will acknowledge that all musical sound carries with it a development of sensations that are already familiar and exhausted, and which predispose the listener to boredom in spite of the efforts of all the innovatory musicians. We Futurists have deeply loved and enjoyed the harmonies of the great masters. For many years, Beethoven and Wagner shook our nerves and hearts. Now we are satiated, and we find far more enjoyment in the combination of the noises of trams, backfiring motors, carriages, and bawling crowds than in rehearsing, for example, the Eroica or the Pastoral. We cannot see that enormous apparatus of force that the modern orchestra represents without feeling the most profound and total disillusion at the paltry acoustic results. Do you know of any sight more ridiculous than that of 20 men furiously bent on the redoubling, the mewling of a violin? All this will naturally make the music lovers scream, and will perhaps enliven the sleepy atmosphere of concert halls. Let us now, as Futurists, enter one of these hospitals for anemic sounds. There, the first bar brings the boredom of familiarity to your ear and anticipates the boredom of the bar to follow. Let us relish from bar to bar 2 or 3 varieties of genuine boredom, waiting all the while for the extraordinary sensations that never comes. Meanwhile, a repugnant mixture is concocted from monotonous sensations and the idiotic religious emotion of listeners Buddhistically drunk with repeating for the nth time their more or less snobbish or second-hand ecstasy. Away! Let us break out, since we cannot much longer restrain our desire to create finally a new musical reality with a generous distribution of resonant slaps in the face, discarding violins, pianos, double basses, and plaintive organs. Let us break out! It's no good objecting that noises are exclusively loud and disagreeable to the ear. It seems pointless to enumerate all the graceful and delicate noises that afford pleasant sensations. To convince ourselves of the amazing variety of noises, it is enough to think of the rumble of thunder, the whistle of the wind, the roar of a waterfall, the gurgling of a brook, the rustling of leaves, the clatter of a trotting horse as it draws into the distance, the lurching jolts of a cart on pavings, and of the generous, solemn, white breathing of a nocturnal city, of all the noises made by wild and domestic animals, and of all those that can be made by the mouth of man without resorting to speaking or singing. Let us cross a great modern capital with our ears more alert than our eyes, and we will get enjoyment from distinguishing the eddying of water, air and gas in metal pipes, the grumbling of noises that breathe and pulse with indisputable animality, the palpitation of valves, the coming and going of pistons, the howl of mechanical saws, the jolting of a tram on its rails, the cracking of whips, the flapping of curtains and flags. We enjoy creating mental orchestrations of the crashing down of metal shop blinds, slamming doors, the hubbub and shuffling of crowds, the variety of din from stations, railways, iron foundries, spinning wheels, printing works, electric power stations, and underground railways. Nor should the newest noises of modern war be forgotten. Recently, the poet Marinetti, in a letter from the trenches of Adrianopolis, described to me with marvelous free words the orchestra of a great battle. Every 5 seconds, siege cannons gutting space with the chord zang tom toom, mutiny of 500 echoes smashing, scattering it to infinity. In the center of this hateful zang tom toom, area 50 square kilometers, leaping bursts, lacerations, fists, rapid fire batteries, violence, ferocity, regularity, this deep bass scanning the strange, shrill, frantic crowds of the battle fury, breathless ears, eyes, nostrils open, load, fire. What a joy to hear, to smell completely, ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta, of the machine guns screaming a breathless under the sting slaps, track, whips, pick-pack, boom-doom, weirdness, lights. 200 meters range far in back of the orchestra, pools muddying, huffing, goaded oxen, wagons, pluff, plaff, horse, actions, flick, flack, zing, zing, shack, laughing, whinnies, the tinkling, jingling, tramping. 3 Bulgarian battalions marching, kruk, crack, slowly, Shumi Maritza or Karavin, Karavina, Zang, Toom, Talk, fast, kruk, crack, slowly, crease of officers slamming about like brass plates, pan here, back there, boom, ching, chack, very fast, cha, down there, up, around, high up, look out your head, beautiful, flashing, footlights of the forts down there behind that smoke. Shukri Pasha communicates by phone with 27 forts in Turkish, in German, allo, Ibrahim, Rudolph, allo, actors, parts, echoes of prompters, scenery of smoke, forest, applause, odor of hay, mud, dung, I no longer feel my frozen feet, odor of gun smoke, odor of rot, timpani flutes, clarinets, everywhere, low, high, birds chirping, blessed shadows, cheep, green breezes flocks, don din ba. Orchestra madman pummel the performers they terribly beat and playing great did not erasing, clearing out, cutting off, sliding noises, very small scraps of echoes in the theater area, 300 square kilometers rivers, Maritza, Tungia, stretched out Rudolpi, mountains, rearing heights, lodges, boxes, 2,000 shrapnels waving, arms exploding, very white handkerchiefs full of gold. Toom, 2,000, raised, grazed, tearing out bursts of very black hair. Zang, toom, zang, tom, toom. The orchestra of the noises of war swelling under a held note of silence in the high sky, round golden balloons that observes the firing. We want to attune and regulate this tremendous variety of noises harmonically and rhythmically. To attune noises does not mean to detract from all their irregular movements and vibrations in time and intensity, but rather to give gradation and tone to the most strongly predominant of these vibrations. Noise, in fact, can be differentiated from sound only insofar as the vibrations which produce it are confused and irregular, both in time and intensity. Every noise has a tone and sometimes also a harmony that predominates over the body of its irregular vibrations. Now it is from this dominating characteristic tone that a practical possibility can be derived for attuning it. That is, to give a certain noise not merely one tone, but a variety of tones, without losing its characteristic tone, by which I mean the one which distinguishes it. In this way, any noise obtained by a rotating movement can offer an entire ascending or descending chromatic scale, if the speed of the movement is increased or decreased. Every manifestation of our life is accompanied by noise. The noise, therefore, is familiar to our ear and has the power to conjure up life itself. Sound, alien to our life, always musical and a thing unto itself, an occasional but unnecessary element, has become to our ears what an overfamiliar face is to our eyes. Noise, however, reaching us in a confused and irregular way from the irregular confusion of our life, never entirely reveals itself to us, and keeps innumerable surprises in reserve. We are therefore certain that by selecting, coordinating, and dominating all noises, we will enrich men with a new and unexpected sensual pleasure. Although it is characteristic of noise to recall us brutally to real life, the art of noise must not limit itself to imitative reproduction. It will achieve its most emotive power in the acoustic enjoyment in its own right that the artist's inspiration will extract from combined noises. Here are the 6 family of noises of the Futurist orchestra, which we will soon set in motion mechanically. Number 1. Rumbles, roars, explosions, crashes, splashes, and booms. Number 2. Whistles, hisses, snorts. Number 3, whispers, murmurs, mumbles, grumbles, gurgles. Number 4, screeches, creaks, rumbles, buzzes, crackles, and scrapes. Number 5, noises obtained by percussion on metal, wood, skin, stone, terracotta, etc. Number 6, voices of animals and men. Shouts, screams, groans, shrieks, howls, laughs, wheezes, sobs. In this inventory, we have encapsulated the most characteristic of the fundamental noises. The others are merely the associations and combinations of these. The rhythmic movements of a noise are infinite. Just as with tone there is always a predominant rhythm, but around this numerous other secondary rhythms can be felt. Conclusions. 1. Futurist musicians must continually enlarge and enrich the field of sounds. This corresponds to a need in our sensibility. We note, in fact, in the composers of genius, a tendency towards the most complicated dissonances. As these move further and further away from pure sound, they almost achieve noise sound. This need and this tendency cannot be satisfied except by the adding and the substitution of noises for sounds. Number 2. Futurist musicians must substitute for the limited variety of tones possessed by orchestral instruments today the infinite variety of tones of noises reproduced with appropriate mechanisms. And number 3, the musician's sensibility, liberated from facile and traditional rhythm, must find in noises the means of extension and renewal, given that every noise offers the union of the most diverse rhythms apart from the predominant one. Number 4, since every noise contains a predominant general tone and its irregular vibrations, it will be easy to obtain in the construction of instruments which imitate them a sufficiently extended variety of tones, semitones and quartertones. This variety of tones will not remove the characteristic tone from each noise, but will amplify only its texture or extension. Number 5, the practical difficulties in constructing these instruments are not serious. Once the mechanical principle which produces the noise has been found, its tone can be changed by following the same general laws of acoustics. If the instrument is to have a rotating movement, for instance, we will increase or decrease the speed, whereas if it is to not have rotating movement, the noise-producing parts will vary in size and tautness. Number 6, the new orchestra will achieve the most complex and novel aural emotions not by incorporating a succession of life-imitating noises, but by manipulating fantastic juxtapositions of these varied tones and rhythms. Therefore, an instrument will have to offer the possibility of tone changes and varying degrees of amplification. Number 7, the variety of noises is infinite. If today, when we have perhaps 1,000 different machines, we can distinguish 1,000 different noises, tomorrow, as new machines multiply, we will be able to distinguish 10, 20, or 30,000 different noises, not merely in a simple imitative way, but to combine them according to our imagination. Number 8. We therefore invite young musicians of talent to conduct a sustained observation of all noises in order to understand the various rhythms of which they are composed, their principal and secondary tones, by comparing the various tones of noises with those of sounds. They will be convinced of the extent to which the former exceed the latter. This will afford not only an understanding but also a taste and passion for noises. After being conquered by futurist eyes, our multiplied sensibilities will at last hear with futurist ears. In this way, the motors and machines of our industrial cities will one day be consciously attuned, so that every factory will be transformed into an intoxicating orchestra of noises. Dear Pratella, I submit these statements to your futurist genius, inviting your discussion. I am not a musician. I have therefore no acoustical predilections, nor any works to defend. I am a futurist painter, using a much-loved art to project my determination to renew everything. and so bolder than a professional musician could be, unconcerned by my apparent incompetence and convinced that all rights and possibilities open up to daring, I have been able to imitate the great renewal of music by means of the art
Dada is a new tendency in art. One can tell this from the fact that until now nobody knew anything about it. and tomorrow everyone in Zurich will be talking about it. Dada comes from the dictionary. It is terribly simple. In French it means hobby horse, unquote. In German it means goodbye, get off my back, be seeing you sometime. In Romanian, yes indeed, you are right, that's it, but of course, yes, definitely right. And so forth. An international word, just a word and the word a movement, very easy to understand, quite terribly simple. To make of it an artistic tendency must mean that one is anticipating complications. Dada psychology, Dada Germany, come indigestion and fog paroxysm, Dada literature, Dada bourgeoisie, and yourselves, honored poets who are always writing with words but never writing the word itself, who are always writing around the actual point. Dada, world war without end, Dada, revolution without beginning, Dada, you friends and also poets, esteemed sirs, manufacturers and evangelists, Dada Tazara, Dada Hulsenbeck, Dada Dada, Dada 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 Dere Dada Dada Hu Dada Tazar. How does one achieve eternal bliss? By saying Dada. How does one become famous? By saying Dada. With a noble gesture and delicate propriety till one goes crazy, till one loses consciousness. How can one get rid of everything that smack of journalism, worms, everything nice and right, blinkered, moralistic, Europeanized, innovated? By saying Dada. Dada is the world's soul. Dada is the pawn shop. Dada is the world's best lily milk soap. Dada, Mr. Rubenel. Dada, Mr. Korodi. Dada, Mr. Anastasius Lilienstein. In plain language, the hospitality of the Swiss is something to be profoundly appreciated, and in questions of aesthetics the key is quality. I shall be reading poems that are meant to dispense with conventional language, no less, and to have done with it. Dada, Johann Wolfgang Goethe, Dada, Stendhal, Dada, Dalai Lama, Buddha, Bible, and Nietzsche. Dada, 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 home, Dada, da. It's a question of connections and of loosening them up a bit to start with. I don't want words that other people have invented. All the words are other people's inventions. I want my own stuff, my own rhythm and vowels and consonants too. If this pulsation is 7 yards long, I want words for it that are 7 yards long. Mr. Schultz's words are only 2.5 centimeters long. It will serve to show how articulated language comes into being. I let the vowels fool around. I let the vowels quite simply occur as a cat meows. Words emerge, shoulders of words, legs, arms, hands of words. Ow, ooey, ooh. One shouldn't let too many words out. A line of poetry is a chance to get rid of all the filth that clings to this accursed language, as if put there by stockbrokers' hands. Hands worn smooth by coins. I want the word where it ends and begins. Dada is the heart of words. Each thing has its word, but the word has become a thing by itself. Why shouldn't I find it? Why can't a tree be called pluplush and pluplubash when it has been raining? The word outside your domain, your stuffiness, this laughable impotence, your stupendous smugness, outside all the parrotry of your self-evident limitedness. The word, gentlemen, is a public concern of the first importance.